Well, thank you, and welcome to the first session. In this session, we will talk about past 50 years of NPT and also discuss future 50 years. So we all know that NPT has been a remarkable success for the past years. But can it be also successful for the next 50 years? I'm not quite sure because these days we have many uncertainties in the nuclear non-proliferation regimes. Recently, great power competition makes global governance increasingly difficult. And also recently in international relations, it is one of the trends is that we see weakening of the international institutions and norms everywhere. So given that, what can we expect for the next 50 years of the NPT system? I think that's the topic we should focus in this session. And we have four excellent panelists in this session. First panelist is Dr. Jim Walsh, who is an expert in international security. Dr. Walsh teaches at MIT's Security Studies program, and he's an expert on international security, and particularly in nuclear weapons. And also, Dr. Walsh is the international security contributor to the NPR. I guess it is a National Public Radio program here and now. And second panelist is Dr. Togzhan Kassenova, who is a senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research at the SUNY in Albany. She's also an adjunct faculty at George Washington University and non-resident fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. She is an expert on nuclear politics, WMD non-proliferation, and strategic trade controls, sanction implementation, and financial crime prevention. Third panelist is Dr. Youngjun Kim, who teaches at the Korea's National Defense University. He's an official member of the National Security Advisory Board, President's Office in Korea. And Youngjun is one of the most active scholars in Korea who works on South Korea's foreign policy and security issues, and also in nuclear non-proliferation area. Last but not least, Dr. Nayoung Lee, who is working as a DG, Director General in the Office of the Nuclear Security in KINAC. She is from the nuclear engineering background. She joined the KINAC in 2007 and has been working on safeguards, nuclear non-proliferation policy, and nuclear security. So I guess we have a very excellent collection of panelists for this session. And because we are already substantially behind the schedule, I would like to urge each panelist to speak for 10 minutes, maximum 12 minutes maybe, for initial statement. And after that, we will continue our panel discussion. So having said that, without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Jim Walsh first. Okay, Dr. Walsh.
Thank you. I want to say, first off, I am honored to have been asked to participate in this very important session by KINAC, and I am honored by how distinguished the opening speakers were and the brilliance of the panel I'm appearing on. And normally I would very much be looking forward to learning quite a bit from my fellow panelists. I must apologize, however, there is one thing that has happened. And that is that earlier today with the staff, I was testing my equipment and it was working fine. And then after that test, I became very sick. And so I am not feeling well. And so my goal is to do something I've never done before, which is to give a talk when I'm not feeling well. And I will get through it. And then I'm going to have to probably depart and jump back in bed and deal with my physical malady. So let me begin my talk though by saying my focus is supposed to be on NPT successes, and those have been mentioned in important ways by the previous speakers. What I will be emphasizing is the NPT's importance is actually underappreciated, and the reasons for its success are misunderstood. So I'm going to quickly go through this PowerPoint. Hopefully it will work. All right. Whoops. My talk, I'm going to quickly cover 4 topics. The startling success of non-proliferation, that puzzle. Why is it that we had so much success is a bit of a puzzle. The fundamental role of the NPT in that success, and then some reflections on the NPT in 2021. Let's start with the first topic, the startling success of non-proliferation, and that's President Johnson signing the NPT. Well, this is the model we have in our heads of proliferation. It's a chart of the total number of nuclear weapon states over time. And as you see, as in most people's minds, it just gets larger and larger and more weapon states. And the origins, of course, are that the Nazis in Germany had a program. The US found out about that program, developed its own bomb. This led Russia and China to pursue nuclear weapons, and their pursuit of nuclear weapons in turn led other countries. China led to India, India led to Pakistan, in simple terms. And that's how we think about it. We think about it as a cascade, this thing that's going to just spread and spread. But if you look at that chart, it's sort of revealing it. The curve is not that sharp, and it sort of flattens out. In fact, a better way to look at non-proliferation, it seems to me, is to look at the rate of proliferation over time. How many new states join the nuclear weapons club every decade? Now, the decade of peak proliferation was the 1960s. You had 3 countries join the nuclear weapons club: France, Israel, and China. But in every decade after, the number of new members of the nuclear weapons club has declined. Shocking. Not increased, but the rate has gone down. In fact, what is striking is the number of countries that had an interest in nuclear weapons, pursued them, sometimes lightly pursuing, sometimes strongly pursuing, but eventually giving them up. Indeed, some 75% of the countries that started down the path of nuclear weapons stopped and reversed course. And that's your list there. Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus are somewhat in a separate category because they inherited nuclear assets after the end of the Cold War, but they agreed to give up those assets. Indeed, you could argue that the non-proliferation is one of the biggest public policy successes of the 20th century, hopefully the 21st, but certainly the 20th. We have far fewer nuclear weapon states than predicted. Fewer states seek nuclear weapons today than ever before. In the 50s and 60s, you had lots of countries seeking nuclear weapons. Since the 1990s, more countries have given up their nuclear assets than acquired them. Kazakhstan, Belarus, South Africa, Ukraine all gave them up, and only North Korea has joined the club. And of the 9 countries that, in my view, have violated their NPT commitments, only one of the 9 went on to become a nuclear weapon state. That's a ridiculously good record. I'm having a little trouble here. Bear with me. You know, it's not enough that I'm sick. My screen has to have problems. Bear with me for one moment. There we go. Because of my screen, I couldn't. There we go. All right, biggest public policy success of the 20th century. But that raises a question. Why were we so successful? Why did everyone predict there were going to be lots of nuclear weapon states, and why did that not happen? And there are different explanations for that. Social scientists and experts debate that. Some people think it's power. The reasons have to do with power. US pressure, US security guarantees, Soviet pressure, Soviet security guarantees. This explanation is very popular, as you might imagine, in the United States, where they think, sanctions and reassurance and US policies have sort of been the most important thing. Other people argue it's been resources that have slowed that down, a lack of money, scientists, foreign technology, access to materials. That's certainly true in some cases. Some people have argued it's ideas, in particular the anti-nuclear norm that has spread and helped reduce the spread of nuclear weapons. And finally, some people think it's institutions, like the international non-proliferation regime. Now, a lot of people doubt, believe it or not, in the scholarly community, doubt that the NPT is a big deal. They say, oh, it's just a piece of paper. Countries don't take it seriously. They've cheated. It has all these flaws. And the pro-NPT crowd says, no, the force of international law is powerful. Moreover, the IAEA has grown only more powerful with greater resources, greater responsibilities, and greater authority over time. To settle this debate, or at least to reflect on it, I take you back to that chart I showed you before. Proliferation peaked in the 1960s, started down in the 1970s, and what happened in 1970? It was the NPT. That's what happened in 1970. So how could a treaty that's flawed, ignores the causes of proliferation, et cetera, achieve one of the greatest public policy successes of the 20th century? Well, I would say this is why, sorry, there's a little lag here. It did some things that most people don't realize. It drew a line in the sand, and it made decision-making transparent. Prior to the NPT, if a defense minister and a prime minister wanted to have a nuclear weapon, they would just go and talk amongst themselves. Maybe they wanted one, maybe they didn't. They didn't tell anyone about it. If they decided not to, they didn't say anything. Maybe they'd get one later. That all changes with the NPT. Then states have to declare, are you in or are you out? And if you're out, then that's going to draw suspicion. And if you're in, you have a whole bunch of obligations that makes getting the bomb a lot tougher. It also reframed the debate. Prior to NPT, the nuclear weapons decision was a defense decision made by a defense minister and a president or the nuclear agency. Once it became a treaty, it changed the debate. It reframed it from a defense decision to a foreign policy decision, and it changed who got to sit at the table. Now the foreign minister, the treasurer, all these other people got to sit and participate in the decision, in part because everyone knew they were making a decision. Again, in the past, you could secretly hold talks amongst a few cabinet members and make policy, not with an NPT. It changed the incentive structure. Pre-NPT, nuclear agencies that were down on their luck would consider a nuclear weapons program to sort of stay in business, as to have something to do. But the NPT said, if you join the NPT, you get access to peaceful nuclear technology. And if you don't join the NPT, you don't. And that changed the incentive structure for several of those nuclear authorities who ended up endorsing the NPT in their deliberations instead of opposing it. It created political winners and losers. It was a settled matter, a matter of international law. Now, the losers could still try, but the bar was much higher. It created, through IAEA, this dynamic, enmeshing, asymmetric set of safeguards obligations. And I would suggest to you that policymakers in the US and elsewhere who say, no, it's these other tools that really got the success, I would say the reason why they had success with reassurance or success with sanctions, which is rather rare, is really because NPT made that happen. Imagine if you didn't have an NPT and it was a free-for-all. Those other tools meant for individual cases would not work as well. You wouldn't be able to focus on the outliers because everyone would have been a potential proliferator. So when people talk about other things causing non-proliferation, causing proliferation, non-proliferation success, what they fail to recognize is the NPT defined the system, got most people out of the game, and then allowed those countries with those tools to focus on a much smaller group of people. Reflections. And now analysts are again warning about nuclear spread, although I must say I'm not impressed by some of the analyses. They seem to be a lot of the same arguments you saw in the 70s and 80s. I think there's almost no appreciation of the NPT, that is to say, how it drew a line in the sand, how it changed incentives, how it created political reasons for countries reasoning on their own self-interest to want to avoid nuclear weapons. Instead, the focus has been on sanctions and coercion. And I think if we ignore the reasons of success, we do so at our own peril. Today, the regime is both stronger, particularly IAEA, and under threat. If we lose NPT because we didn't understand it and we didn't recognize how important it was, we're going to be asking ourselves in years to come, how could we be such idiots? We had this great thing and we let it slip away. In summary, we've had tremendous unexpected success. The NPT is a huge part of that success. Agreements don't have to be perfect to be effective. The NPT wasn't perfect, but it got the job done. Diplomacy and agreements alter the internal politics of nuclear weapons decision-making, create new realities, and that's how they work. The lesson of the NPT is to create the political and other conditions that allow a government to decide on its own that it's in its national interests to forego nuclear weapons. And that, my friends, is how we will have non-proliferation success in the future. That's the end of my talk, and unfortunately, the end of my attendance for this morning. I apologize for my presentation. It's the best I could do under the circumstances, and I hope it gives some of you food for thought. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You gave us a very nice and comprehensive overview about the NPT, so we'll later discuss it further. Well, second panelist is Dr. Togzhan Kassenova. Please.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for the invitation and for the opportunity to participate virtually. I wish I was with all of you in South Korea. I was asked to speak today about the challenges to the NPT, as my colleague so ably discussed the successes. I will focus on the challenges, which are plenty, but I would preface by saying that the NPT had more successes than failures. And I think in terms of the fate of the NPT, it was in a much more dangerous position back in 1995 when the international community, the state parties were deciding whether to extend the NPT and if to extend then for what period of time. So while I'll be talking about the challenges, I just wanted to say that I'm not pessimistic about the NPT, and I hope the treaty will continue to provide the foundation for the nuclear order. So, but if we are to speak about the challenges, I would cluster them in 4 groups. And my first cluster is something that has been alluded to in several remarks previously, and especially in the keynote, and that's of course the tension among great powers. The relationship between the United States and Russia is at all-time low. The extension of New START was really, just like it's the only arms control treaty between two major nuclear powers, and they were that close to losing it completely. And just the fact that it was squeezed in just before it expired, while it's a very good development, and I'm happy it happened, but it also shows, you know, this thin line that we're walking with two countries that possess almost 90% of the world's nuclear arsenals. But noting the current context of the bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia, I think we cannot expect any new arms control treaties in the foreseeable future, which has a direct impact on the NPT. And then, of course, another important player, China. And on that front, again, the tension that exists, especially between the United States and China, and the lack of prospects, at least currently, for any arms control negotiations between US, Russia, and China, and as well as modernization of nuclear arsenals of these three countries that was mentioned earlier. All of this adds to the pessimism about global nuclear order in general and the prospects for disarmament, which, you know, again, is directly relevant to how the NPT is viewed by the majority of countries around the world. The second cluster of challenges, I see it in the following. It's the fact that the NPT doesn't apply to 4 countries that possess nuclear weapons. And these are, of course, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. And while these 4 do not have the largest arsenals, the fact that almost half of the countries that have nuclear weapons remain outside of the NPT and remain outside of NPT's reach, I think, is a fundamental weakness of the NPT regime. I would like to highlight in this context, I would like to highlight the situation with North Korea, as at the moment, this is one of the most serious challenges to the non-proliferation regime. A big part of my day job is devoted to the question of North Korea's procurement of dual-use goods and its sanctions evasion techniques. And unfortunately, what we observe is showing that whatever international controls are in place, they are not working well. North Korea continues to advance its nuclear and missile programs, often with the use and the abuse of the international commercial market and the global financial system. I also spend a lot of my time on projects designed to help with the implementation of the UN sanctions on North Korea. And that experience and, you know, my travel and my interaction with different governments around the world frankly leaves me uneasy about our shared lack of ability to prevent sanctions evasion by North Korea. And as a result, its undeterred proliferation activity. Basically, North Korea can procure pretty much whatever it needs for its program, and it finds ways to pay for these goods via international banks, and it also abuses the global financial system for money laundering and fundraising. And so the example of North Korea, a country that withdrew from the NPT and which cannot be stopped from advancing its weapons program, is in a way a monument to NPT's limitations. NPT works well in relation to individual countries until it doesn't. And North Korea's case showed us that on some occasions, the promise and the actual delivery of punishment, in this case, sanctions against North Korea, are not enough of a deterrent. And this leads me to the following thought. Countries that are not deterred by punishment, such as North Korea, will care even less about norms. I do think such countries are in minority. Most of the countries do care about the norms, and that's why we have such a good adherence to the NPT, and that's why we have majority of countries as non-nuclear weapon states. Because most countries do care about their reputation, their standing in the international system, and their adherence to the norms. So in this sense, it's the legitimacy and respect for the NPT as a norm-setting treaty that we should care about and protect with everything we have. Unfortunately, as the last couple of decades show, it is on this front that the NPT is starting to have some serious trouble. I'm speaking about its normative standing. Seen more and more as an inherently unfair and unjust arrangement under which some commitments somehow weigh more than others. And here, of course, I'm talking about the tension between non-proliferation and disarmament, and the call from the majority of the NPT states for greater attention to disarmament commitments. Another non-proliferation strain is what is happening, of course, with the Iran nuclear deal. The United States withdrew under President Trump. The current context is much more conducive to positive developments with the negotiations going on in Vienna. But as of right now, the Iran dimension is an open case, and how it will be resolved will also have implications for the NPT. Under the third cluster, I have what I would classify as not a negative, but rather a healthy challenge to the NPT. And that's the adoption and the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW. I do not agree with the critics of TPNW who claim that the new treaty threatens NPT's existence or that it was created to undermine it. I think it's disingenuous to say this, especially that many countries among the proponents of the TPNW explicitly support the essence and the norm of the NPT. I see TPNW as a reaction and as a push for the NPT nuclear weapon states to act on Article 6. In that sense, for those who truly care about the NPT, its future and its sustainability, TPNW should be seen as a useful alarm bell and an incentive to pay equal attention to Article 6 as to other articles. But I would repeat myself, I don't think it is fair to say that TPNW's goal is to undermine the NPT. And I think there is some danger, if this is repeated too often, that TPNW will undermine the NPT, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I really think that we should be careful with that. And finally, the fourth cluster of challenges. These are several challenges that are manifesting themselves in the areas adjacent to the NPT, specifically with the instruments and treaties that are meant to help with the NPT implementation and standing. Number one on this list is the International Atomic Energy Agency and the fact that it's strapped for resources. I really appreciated how one of the earlier speakers brought attention to safeguards funding of the agency, because with more and more responsibilities piled up on the IAEA, it is imperative that the organization is comfortably funded. It is not the case. The budget for safeguards is roughly 150 million euros. And as one of my colleagues, the queen of safeguards, Laura Rockwood, compared, this is less than 3% of the budget of the New York City Police Department. So the second adjacent instrument is the CTBT, also mentioned earlier. Banning nuclear tests is fundamental both for non-proliferation, that no new nuclear states appear, And for disarmament, as long as nuclear tests are allowed, we cannot talk about conditions for a nuclear-free world. The prospects for the CTBT's entry into force in the immediate future are not exactly promising. I will use the example of the United States, one of the states of the Annex II, whose ratification is required for the CTBT to enter into force. The new US President, Joe Biden, he's been a supporter of the CTBT for decades, back when he was a senator and then when he was a vice president in Obama's administration. So we know that he believes in the CTBT and he thinks ratification is important, but President Biden has so many other urgent issues to deal with that it is hard to imagine his administration will take on this as a policy priority in the foreseeable future. It is doubtful that the US administration will bring the CTBT to Congress for ratification unless it can be absolutely sure that they can secure the votes. And of course, there is an even more hopeless case of the fissile material cutoff treaty. Again, this is the kind of instrument which, if adopted, could really prop up the NPT. To sum up, the NPT is under strain at both the fundamental level with the tensions between great powers, dire prospects for disarmament, disillusionment, and at the practical level, the challenges are the inability of the international community to deal with North Korea's proliferation activity, the unresolved issue of Iran, constraints on the IAEA as it remains underfunded, the unratified the CTBT that is not in force, and the hopeless FMCT. But I don't want, it only sounds so negative and pessimistic because I was asked to speak about the challenges. I just want to leave it with what I truly believe in, and what I believe in is that it's really in the international community's interest that the NPT remains, and that it remains strong, and that all countries do what they can to make it stronger. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You excellently explained the 4 clusters of challenges that we face with the NPT regimes. Okay, third panelist, Dr. Kim Youngjun.
Thank you very much for inviting me in this great panel as a presenter. Also, before starting my conversation, I would like to share good news on Dr. Lee Sanghyun, who is one of my best colleagues and respected senior colleague. He became the president of Sejong Institute, one of the top think tanks in Korea. I would like to share this good news with all of you for this opportunity.
Well, thank you.
And he also is president of the Korean Nuclear Policy Society as well. He asked me the point about the prospect for the next 50 years of the NPT. So I got the 4 positive factors and 4 negative factors for the next 50 years. I absolutely agree with you, Dr. Walsh, on the NPT was a great success, even though we have still have many challenges. And also, I absolutely agree with the Dr. Kassenova. Also, challenges that's similar to my negative factor as well. So, from the point of view, I'd like to share firstly 4 negative factors for the next 50 years. Already Ambassador Kim mentioned about in his wonderful keynote speech. We have now a different situation in a post-pandemic world. So post-pandemic has changed the world in a direction unexpected way. So state focus more short-term policy issue based on populism, including minimum wage or building infrastructure, rather than long-term goals based on international cooperation like non-proliferation or climate change. Because the people now want more and more, surely, because the pandemic situation changed all policy world. So this is good for quality of people's life, but bad for the non-proliferation issue, because every state in a democratic world have to focus on more short-term goal policy issue like everyday life of the people. So we need to build up and more raise up people's concern on non-proliferation significant. And second challenge issue is the emerging technology, which is the still on the very lack of the treaty. Cyber, hypersonic weapon, or biotech, or AI technology, especially AI technology, have increasing nuclear risk, because without human being, it will be more dangerous war. So we still have a very weak international community in controlling this kind of a new emerging technology. So we have to find more realistic international arms control treaty on cyber, hypersonic, and biotech and AI technology as well. Also, U.S. now focusing on low-yield nuclear warhead and modernization of their nuclear capability as well. So we need to focus on new technology. And third issue, we still have a strong non-consensus among nuclear weapon state and non-nuclear weapon state, especially focusing on TPNW, which Dr. Kassenova already suggested, and also nuclear free zone issue, which will never ending, I think, because of Israel, Palestine, in Middle East, nuclear free zone issue. And look at today's world on the Israel-Palestine area, which is very difficult for building consensus on Middle East free zone. And also, look at the Northeast Asian now. It's China and Russia and US and Japan, even North and South Korea. It's kind of a nuclear domino we're concerned about. In South Korea, many people already talk about NATO-style nuclear sharing or reintroduction of technical nuclear weapons into the South Korean territory. So we have many concerns on the nuclear domino in Northeast Asia. So it will be another challenge for the next 50 years. And final factor will be US, China, Russia, and strategic competition. Trump has gone, everybody happy, but his legacy still exists. I think it's Christopher suggested many concern on the violation of Russian activity, on the new hypersonic weapon, all kind of thing. Also, China has their own ambition for modernization of their nuclear capability. So we have still same problem, even though Trump has gone. So we need to think about the how to solve this problem. But we have also good positive factor for the next 50 years. Why not? The first thing is Ambassador Kim already pointed out new U.S. leadership. Biden, no more back. So Trump has gone, and Biden bring us to the normal world. So New START now is extended, right? And international law based on the world will be get back. So this is a very good news, and U.S. leadership is a key factor for maintaining successful 50 years of NPT. Second thing is it will be maybe depends on people, positive or negative, but personally believe, I think it's a denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula will be a positive factor for the next 50 years, because Biden administration choose more practical, creative, arms control type approach to the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue. So I think it will be more open up, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So I think it's a positive factor. Third thing is Iran, JCPOA back. So new Biden administration will bring Iran JCPOA for the revival. So I think it will be another good factor for the next 50 years. And the final factor is the U.S.-Russian cooperation. I don't know, today or tomorrow Geneva conference between the U.S. and Russia will be successful or not. But anyway, Russia, Putin, and Biden of the U.S. have to cooperate in a post-pandemic world. So I think it will be another positive factor. Beyond this all kind of factors that I suggest is one other regional issue is the U.S.-Iraq nuclear cooperation for more nuclear power plant and SMR model will be another small regional issue for more positive thing for the peaceful use of nuclear energy. So this is my main argument. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Youngjun, you nicely summarized the 4 positive factors and 4 negative factors for the future of the nuclear NPT system. Okay, the last but not least panelist, Dr. Young from KINAC, please.
Thank you. Okay, good morning, good evening. So, as introduced, my name is Nayoung Lee from KINAC. It's my great honor to introduce the Korean case in front of eminent and distinguished experts. As you already heard about many presenters, they already showed us a big picture of NPT, but I'm a kind of technical side, so I will just narrowing down and I will show you the real case, real world case about the NPT, what we experienced in Korea. So today I'll talk about the value of NPT, ROC's case. NPT has various reputations. Some are positive, while some are negative. The negative parts mostly deal with the inequality and discrimination between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. Critics say that the NPT is discriminatory because it accepts 5 nuclear powers while freezing out all others. At the same time, non-nuclear weapon states felt a strong non-proliferation norm was unfair because they had yet to reap the benefits of the NPT regime. Here, I'd like to look at the background of the development of the NPT. Looking back on the past, the number of countries with nuclear weapons continued to increase. Many people feared a nuclear war and eventually the collapse of the planet. Without the NPT, nuclear weapon states would further develop nuclear weapons, and this might spur non-nuclear weapon states to develop nuclear weapons. If this happened, it would have caused global panic. By introducing the NPT, nuclear weapon states provide nuclear materials, technology, and facilities to the non-nuclear weapon state. In return, the non-nuclear weapon states have the right to peaceful use of nuclear once they abide by the NPT mechanism of non-proliferation. In this sense, focusing on the discriminatory aspect of the NPT is moot point, as this aspect had already been agreed upon at the beginning of the NPT. Hence, the discussion on whether the core objectives of the NPT, nuclear weapon states providing nuclear materials, technology, and facilities in return for non-nuclear weapon states proliferation, has been working properly seems more constructive. Therefore, I will talk about South Korea, which has been one of the best cases of promoting peaceful use to show that the NPT is working as intended. So this is the outline of my talk. First of all, let me explain how ROC expanded its peaceful use of nuclear power in the 1970s after it joined the NPT. Also, let me tell you about the NPT measures experienced during the spread of peaceful use. Such experiences do not apply only to us. Let me wrap up my presentation by introducing the case of United Arab Emirates, which ROC as a non-nuclear weapon state exported nuclear power plants. So, ROC ratified the NPT in 1975 and began commercial operation of its nuclear power plant in 1978. As you see in this slide shows our first nuclear power plant located at Gori site. More than 40 years have passed since the first commercial operation of the nuclear power plant. This slide is captured from the Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power Company website. Unfortunately, this is Korean website, but even though 2 first-generation nuclear power plants shut down, we still have 24 in operation. We are committed to serving our NPT obligations until we get here. After ROC ratified NPT, it then ratified Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement with the IAEA. In addition, ROC ratified additional protocol in 2004. At that time, we missed reporting research on the enrichment experiment using laser. In the process of resolving misunderstandings, we realized the importance of transparency and have been actively working with IAEA since then. As a result, agency concluded broader conclusion to ROC in 2008 and started applying integrated safeguard system with confidence. In addition, ROC and IAEA signed the enhanced cooperation arrangement in 2012 to expand the role of the ROC SSAC, which provides technical support to the agency more actively. Here, SSAC is the abbreviation of the State System of Accounting for and Control of Nuclear Material. Yep. As a non-nuclear weapon state, we do not have much experience in export control. But since we signed KEDO to implement it, export control system, including legislation, was established. We joined the NSG afterwards to continue to communicate with the international community about best practices and norms related to export control. Since 2008, we established and utilized the web-based export control system we call NEPS, as shown in this slide. As other countries, ROC joined the CPP-NM and implemented physical protection. But after 9/11, the importance of nuclear security was emphasized. Infosec 225, which is the recommendation document on physical protection, was revised. Accordingly, ROC enacted Act on Physical Protection and Radiological Emergency for Nuclear Facilities and Nuclear Materials in 2004. As ROC didn't have such a significant event like 9/11, the awareness of the physical protection system was not high. So the physical protection of facilities under the responsibility of the state was not that strong. In 2006, ROC experienced an incident which stopped US from supplying nuclear fuel for the research reactor because its physical protection system did not satisfy their standards. Once again, we realized the importance of physical protection system. Since then, we have tried to improve and strengthen the physical protection system for each facility. As you know, the physical protection system of each country is different, so it cannot be directly compared to each other. Also, much of the information is confidential, so it is difficult to assess. ROC, however, through the hosting of the Nuclear Security Summit and the IAEA's International Physical Protection Advisory Service, so-called IPAS mission, was able to confirm that our physical protection system had indeed been strengthened. In 2009, Korea exported its commercial nuclear power plants to the United Arab Emirates. The Middle East is, as you know, a very complex geopolitical location, with many Middle Eastern countries interested in using nuclear for various purposes. Although the UAE was late to start, it drew the attention of the international community for signing a nuclear cooperation agreement evaluated as the gold standard with the United States. The UAE built nuclear power plants faithfully in line with the NPT regime and began commercial operation in April this year. Iran and the UAE are the only countries currently operating nuclear power plants in the Middle East area. While Iran is more well known of the two, UAE's capacity is higher than Iran. The gap between the two countries is continuing to broaden each year. Given this, I think the UAE's faithful compliance to the NPT regime is the reason for the rapid expansion of the peaceful use. And through this, it has become a role model for the Middle East. Now, I will summarize my talk. For the non-nuclear weapon state, key point of the NPT's objective is to promote cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy while preventing the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology. Since 1975, ROC has continually expanded the peaceful use of nuclear power from the moment it joined the NPT. In this process, ROC was able to experience the three measures of the NPT regime: safeguards, export control, and security. There were several events that made us realize the importance of each measure in the actual implementation process. Through these experiences, we are able to tell you that South Korea, as a non-nuclear weapon state, benefited from the NPT objective of peaceful use, and the regime has continually supported these efforts. South Korea has risen from being provided nuclear power to supplying it. The UAE is another successful model of the NPT with its implementation of the gold standard. In conclusion, under the concrete and improved NPT regime, I expect peaceful use of nuclear technology continue to expand. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Lee. You very nicely summarized the South Korea's experience with the NPT. So as you listened, we had a very excellent full presentation. So before we get in panel discussion, as a moderator, I would like to ask one question to each panelist, which audience may be interested to hear from you. Dr. Walsh, I understand Biden administration put high priority in restoring U.S. global leadership. But throughout Trump administration, U.S. commitment to non-proliferation has been substantially weakened. For example, like Trump's nuclear posture review and termination of the INF Treaty, and also working out of the JCPOA. So given that trend, in order to restore U.S. global leadership, particularly in non-proliferation area, what do you think is the most important challenge for the U.S. had to handle with? And Dr. Kassenova, I noticed in your bio that you wrote a very nice book about the denuclearization of the Kazakhstan. I myself visited Nur Sultan, formerly Astana, 3 years ago, and had a chance to visit Nazarbayev Center. And the exhibition about the denuclearization process was quite impressive. Given Kazakhstan's successful experience of successful denuclearization, what a lesson could you give for the Korean Peninsula? And third, Youngjun, you mentioned several negative factors for the future of the NPT regime, like emerging technology, AI, etc. And among these many factors, what do you think is the most imminent and serious challenge to maintain the NPT regime in the coming decades? And finally, Dr. Ina Young, you cited the case of UAE as one of the successful model. And interestingly, recently, Korea-US summit, in the joint statement, both countries agreed to work on nuclear cooperation. So in how that cooperation will unfold in the future. So this is my question. And if any of you have any question to other panelists, feel free to raise that issue. So could you, Dr. Jim Walsh, could you start?
You know, Dr. Walsh, because he wasn't feeling well, he had to leave, but I'll be happy to step in and address both questions on his behalf.
That's great. Yeah.
No, he really made an effort. I'm so appreciative that he was able to deliver his presentation, but he didn't feel well. So on your first question, I don't know how Professor Walsh would have answered it, but if I were to answer it, I think President Biden has a lot of damage control to do. The last 4 years were very damaging to the standing of the United States in the international community. And you know what I see as the main challenge, it's about reliability. It's about proving to the international community, and first and foremost to the allies of the United States, that this is the country that can be relied on, and that whatever, you know, the government promises that they would deliver on the international arena. It's very hard to do, but it's amazing how quickly Biden's administration moved on some of the key issues. And so I think it's tough, but they're doing it, and they're doing their best. And for our field, what's most noticeable is of course, that they pushed for extension of New START, and that they're pushing for return to the JCPOA. On the second question that was addressed to me, I'm so grateful that you brought up my country of origin, Kazakhstan. And the question of whether Kazakhstan's experience of denuclearization can be applied to the Korean Peninsula is something that I've thought about before, and sometimes discussed with my South Korean colleagues. So in Kazakhstan's case, why it worked, first of all, I should preface that the situation on the Korean Peninsula is very different from Kazakhstan's case, but there are some lessons that I think are applicable. One fundamental applicable lesson is that the international community was able to deliver on Kazakhstan's, for that moment, key needs and challenges. So in Kazakhstan's case, it was about security assurances. It was about confirming that if there is any threat to Kazakhstan's territorial integrity or sovereignty, that there would be support. Then on a more practical level, Kazakhstan needed access to international markets, to international organizations, and that's also something that was facilitated partly as grand bargain of the nuclear diplomacy. On an even more practical level, and where I think it's very applicable for North Korea's case, it's the practical, technical, and financial assistance with denuclearization under the cooperative threat reduction model. And so it's one question on how to get to the point of North Korea deciding that it would either reduce or completely disarm its nuclear arsenal. But if we reach that point, there are some very practical lessons and tools that already exist, and the primary among them is the cooperative threat reduction. And I actually sometimes think that it's exactly the post-Soviet countries, including Kazakhstan, that could be used as intermediaries or help with the implementation, because they would have experience of how to do denuclearization projects, but their presence will probably be less sensitive, for example, for North Korea than the presence of American project managers, for example. So I'll stop here. There are definitely some both strategic and tactical lessons that can be gleaned from Kazakhstan's case.
Well, thank you. That's a very nice response. It sounds to me, you mentioned the needs and security assurance. And one of the ways to provide to those is the CTR, cooperative threat reduction. And I think many experts in Korea also work on CTR program to apply for those Korea. But as you mentioned, how can we invite them to the talking table? I think that's the most difficult part to start with. Okay, Dr. Kim.
Yeah, excellent question. Thank you for the excellent question. We have many challenges. Somebody pointed out North Korea as a main factor, or somebody pointed out Iran or new technology. But among those issues, I consider the great power competition is one of the most challenging, because every issue is related to the lack of trust between US, China, and Russia. And TPNW issue also is related with this issue, and also nuclear arms race. And in this big country, they already spent a lot of $1 billion to the modernization their nuclear warhead or delivery system, including hypersonic missile or tactical nuclear weapons, or even the Iskander Russian, and they changed the doctrine as well. We remember already Kaliningrad situation after the Ukraine issue. So this all these nuclear arms race is bad, to the world. That is one of the most difficult problem, and also U.S.-China competition is related to the same issue as well. So Trump has gone, but Biden still have a same U.S.-China competition, and the Quad issue or the other Asian nuclear sharing group, already former defense secretary suggested in the Council on Chicago International Affairs or something like that. He already argument of the Asian nuclear policy planning group, Togzhan Europe. So this kind of a great power competition is the pushing space war, nuclear war, and the other missile war. So we have a lot of problems, especially in this region, Northeast Asia, including North Korea issue as well, and also Japanese militarization issue. So maybe somebody said about South Korea as one of the factors for nuclear arms race as well, but I don't know. But anyway, this kind of great power competition, I think, is the most difficult challenge for the next few years.
Well, thank you. I agree with you that great power competition may be one of the most difficult part to handling non-proliferation regime. And do you believe, is there any way to reverse that competition in the near future?
Yeah, sure. I'm optimistic. So we have a Beijing Olympic, why not? And also post-pandemic situation is bring some international cooperation, and I think the North Korean denuclearization, if it's successful, maybe one of the successful multilateral security guarantee for the one single issue. So I believe we can solve the problem, but I don't know, somebody call it this cold peace, somebody say this is before the stage for the another war, but we'll see. I'm more optimistic.
Well, that's a little bit encouraging. Dr. Lee?
Okay, maybe you will know many countries. If you open the newspaper, you will find some countries that can export nuclear power plants, but they are not many. And most of the countries are nuclear weapon states, and they didn't experience the obligation like safeguards, export control, and nuclear security. Of course, they have some experience, but safeguards is different part. And also nuclear security has different meaning to the non-nuclear weapon state. And we already experienced it. As Ambassador Kim mentioned earlier in his keynote speech, even COVID-19 can be a blessing to NPT. So I think our bad trial and error would be a very blessing for us because we have experienced many things. So we can bring our experience to the newcomer countries. That's why United States think that Korea can be a good partnership for nuclear export. And I'm kind of member of when we negotiate with the nuclear bilateral cooperation agreement. At that time, I realized that United States is very strong. They want on any countries, if they have nuclear power, they should abide by NPT regime. And I think United States strongly believe us that we can do that kind of mission. So I think we can do it, and I hope we have a good news in the near future. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Is there any question from audiences? While I'm collecting, I would like to invite if there's any question or comments from the floor. Dr. Kim, Ambassador Kim, do you have any comments?
We have some in the chat, some questions online that came in.
Okay.
And I can address a question that was asked of me, if you allow me.
Yes, please answer this question. This is directed to you.
So the question is, we discussed the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, but there is little discussion about change in North Korea's weapons program into a civilian program focused on the NPT, which is more promising in such work rather than disarmament. Is there any possibility to do so? I think it's an excellent question, and I just want to clarify that, for example, when I talk about denuclearization, I only use this word for nuclear weapons program, and again, I can bring the case of my own country, Kazakhstan, that while Kazakhstan gave up nuclear arsenal and eliminated weapons infrastructure, Kazakhstan's civilian nuclear sector is very advanced in the nuclear fuel production, uranium mining, and so on. So I actually think it would be an ideal situation if North Korea agrees to give up on the weapons part and use nuclear energy for scientific, for medical, for all sorts of nuclear power purposes. I think it would be an ideal scenario, and I think it should be welcomed, and we shouldn't be afraid of such a scenario, right? So yeah, for me, denuclearization is about the military applications, and I'm actually in support of peaceful nuclear energy, especially when it comes to scientific and medical purposes. So thank you for the good question, and thank you.
Well, thank you for a nice answer. Is there any more questions? Or question to all panelists, how do you expect to empty the future perspective? What exactly mean future perspective? I'm not quite sure, but Dr. Lee or Professor Kim?
I don't know the exact question meaning, maybe TPNW and NPT versus, I think it's still NPT
Maybe,
framework is meaningful for the future. That's the question. For the question, I think it's a realistic world. TPNW is theoretically absolutely supportive, but realistic world we still have a human nature issue to fear about other state arms race or development of their nuclear and missile program. So if it's the question relevant to the TPNW as an alternative for the NPT, I believe the NPT is still a successful regime rather than TPNW, even though I theoretically absolutely supportive of the TPNW split and the region for the future.
Dr. Lee, do you have any response?
Okay, what I'm thinking about the future of NPT or perspective of NPT, I think we should think about our first objective of the NPT itself. And maybe I found Jim Walsh's presentation, there was a word that they ignored the benefits of the NPT. But as you know, as you see in Korea, we are benefited from the NPT, but they don't really realize this one. So nuclear weapon states and all the developed countries should support other countries so that they can understand what would be the benefit of nuclear energy. They don't have it, they don't know it, then they will not like NPT because they don't benefit it at all. So I think we should think about this point, and we should promote more about nuclear power, and maybe then the future of NPT perspective, NPT would be much better, brighter, I think.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Kassenova, you also mentioned address the 4 cluster challenges for the future of NPT. So given your thought on that challenges, is there any suggestion for the future of the NPT?
So while I see this very
please unmute.
Can you hear me now? Because I'm unmuted on my side.
We can't hear.
Let me try again. Can you hear me now?
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Sorry.
Perhaps technical problem, I guess. You unmuted. Okay, sorry for that.
Okay.
From the floor, Ambassador Kim. Here.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay, no, thank you. I want to ask a question to the moderator because you asked me to ask the question, because follow up on your last question to Dr. Kim about the future and challenges of NPT. And I think one of the greatest challenge, maybe wild card for nuclear disarmament and arms control front is US-China relationship. Because starting strategic arms control dialogue between the US and China is not easy because of wide divergence on the starting point. Because China first wants to catch up. Because in their view, their nuclear arsenal is too far less than those of US and Russia. US and Russia could start strategic arms control dialogue because they were almost at parity. So how we can solve this conundrum? Because US-China should engage, and how we can make them sit down at the table, and what should be the starting point, and what should be the formula of their strategic arms control dialogue, if it starts?
Well, that might be the most difficult question raised in today's session. I understand US-China competition may be one of those most important competition or confrontation of the international politics. So we all understand that US-China competition is not focused on a single issue. Every aspect of their relationship, economy, security, and even value system. And they have a different perspective on a rule-based international order. So if that's the nature of the US-China competition, I don't think it will be over sooner or later. It will continue for the quite time in the future. So given that perhaps we don't have, it is kind of a little bit disappointing to understand that because we don't have much to say about or nothing to pressure either US or China because they are superpowers. They simply will not listen to other countries. So if that's all, perhaps it might be too pessimistic. But I would say at least we have some reason for the humankind. Okay? So we have values. We all understand that common danger we face today. So let them compete. Other nations like Korea, Japan, and European countries, we all understand this is a quite important issue. If we cannot stop a nuclear proliferation, we will face increasingly much more serious danger. So we must speak up. Okay, international politics or global community is not the sole possession of the US and China. We all share this world and we all share responsibility. It may be a little bit abstract, but that's my best answer. Okay, because of time and because Dr. Kim, Professor Kim has to leave soon for train, let me conclude this session at this moment. I appreciate all four excellent panelists for presenting and also I appreciate all the audience who logged in either from Korea or overseas. So future of the NPT, I think that's quite an important issue. Perhaps humanity relies on fate of the humanity, future of humanity. So the fate rely on the future of the NPT system. So if we cannot make it better, perhaps our danger will also increase. So it's all our responsibility to share with. Okay, let me conclude and thank you very much.